The whole history of America is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their problems are caused by brown and black people. That is the whole history of America. All the rest, as they say, is commentary. That's how we learned it. It wasn't a collective history, it was an individual history. Into that historical framework and theory walks a man like Donald Trump, who is all about that mentality, right? Someone who comes in and says, I alone, his words, not mine, I alone can solve the problems of our country. I alone can fix the economy. I alone can defeat ISIS. I alone can handle this problem and that problem and this problem and that problem. So there are really, at this particular moment in time, two sort of visions of America and about social change that are at war with one another. And these two particular visions of America and of social change are entirely incompatible with one another. They cannot coexist. One must die in order for the other to live. Make no mistake, there can be no compromise, there can be no playing nice. One must die in order for the other to live. So here we are, little over 8 years ago, when Barack Obama was elected president. I remember like that very week, right, going out and speaking to folks, and remember getting emails like that week. I remember this one, all capital letters, red font, so you know it's gonna be bad, right? All capital letters in red font. The person is angry, and they're trying to let you know that they're angry. So the guy's like, ha 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 ha. Okay, first of all, it's like 6 in the morning. Stop with the ha ha ha, right? It's too early for that, right? And he says, you're gonna have to get a new hustle, because, that's what this is when you're in America. It's always a hustle when you fight white supremacy. That's a great way to get rich and famous and powerful. Speaking up against white supremacy is a hell of a plot. That's a great conspiracy, right? You're gonna have to get a new hustle, he said, because now that a black man has been elected president, how could racism possibly be a problem? Yeah, well, a little over 8 years later, I guess we're over that now. We have other problems, right? So here we are, trying to make sense of things, I suppose, and I want to suggest to you a couple of things before we really get into the substance of the remarks, right? One is this isn't just an ideological or philosophical or political debate we're having. There are really, at this particular moment in time, two sort of visions of America and about social change that are at war with one another. And these two particular visions of America and of social change are entirely incompatible with one another. They cannot coexist. One must die in order for the other to live. Make no mistake, there can be no compromise, there can be no playing nice. One must die in order for the other to live. And the two theories of America and social change are basically this. Number one, the sort of great man theory of America and social change, right? Which is a very long-standing theory, this idea that we have problems and along comes some great individual, usually a dude, right? Who's gonna solve all of our problems, right? You just elect the right person, you hire the right person, you have the right person in charge of stuff, and things get changed. And that's a very long-standing theory. Right? It's actually what we learned, to be honest with you, it's what we were taught. Probably going back to like 8th grade American history, because if you think about how we learned history, it was always a collection of quote unquote great men, right? It was about great generals who fought wars and won certain battles. It was about great founding fathers who created this wonderful country, blah, blah, blah. It was about great entrepreneurs and industrialists who built the economy, right? That's how we learned it. It wasn't a collective history, it was an individual history. Into that historical framework and theory walks a man like Donald Trump, who is all about that mentality, right? Someone who comes in and says, I alone, his words, not mine, I alone can solve the problems of our country. I alone can fix the economy. I alone can defeat ISIS. I alone can handle this problem and that problem and this problem and that problem. So when he says that stuff, it's not like he came up with that, right? Anyone who thinks Donald Trump has had an original thought at any point in his life has paid no attention either to his life or the history of the country that you live in, right? He's simply playing into a mentality that's very common, right? This idea that change is done by great individuals who seize the moment, right? That America has crises and problems and some person comes along and fixes them, which is inherently a disempowering narrative, isn't it? It's one that says, you don't have to do anything. All you have to do is put your faith in the power of a leader, allow your will to become his will to become your will. It's an inherently anti-democratic, small d, inherently authoritarian, inherently fascist mentality. And there's another theory of America and another theory of social change, and that theory lives in a building that is literally 2 blocks from the new home of Donald Trump. It resides in the Museum of African American History and Culture, which if you have not had the opportunity to visit it, you should take the time, make the effort, and go. Because in that building, 2 blocks roughly, long blocks, but still, from Donald Trump's new home, where he will spend at least a little time when he's not locked away in Trump Tower or Mar-a-Lago. In that building, one sees the alternative version of America, and most certainly the alternative version of change in a social context, because what does that building tell us? It tells us about a nation that is about pain amid promise, and promise amid pain. It tells of a country where all of the change that has come has been the result of the collective efforts of committed people waiting on no man, on no great leader to solve their problems. When you walk through that museum, you begin to see how change really happens. It does not come from the top, it comes from the bottom. It comes from the people. You walk into that museum and you begin at the bottom level. They go down 10 stories.
That is something I have been thinking about lately. Why is it that whenever a country is facing serious problems, people often start looking for one powerful person to come and save everything? We see it in politics all the time. People believe that if the right president comes into power, everything will suddenly change. The economy will improve, inequality will disappear, society will become more united. But what if that way of thinking is actually part of the problem, guys? That is one of the ideas that really stood out to me in a speech by author and Professor Tim Whyte. And that is the kind of video I want us to watch today. So guys, I want you to stay tuned until the end. Then I'll be back with my 2 cents.
And start at the bottom with the enslavement of African peoples and work up. It is both symbolic and more than that. It is suggestive of how history unfolds and how change happens. And by the time you get up there, several levels above, right, you begin to see how the collective change, everything that has made this country anything remotely worth defending or supporting, has been the result of the collective action of people who would not settle for the great man, who would not settle for the great leader, who would not settle for the empty promises and the rhetoric of fools. And so you come into one part, and I don't want to spoil it for you, but tickets are hard to get right now, so it might be a minute before you get in, so I'm going to tell you what I have to tell you. There's a part where you come in, there's a statue of Thomas Jefferson, and it's dark. The lighting's about like it is in this room. It's on purpose, right? Statue of Jefferson, and behind him on the wall, lit up quite a bit better than his statue, right, is an engraving on the wall of words from the Declaration of Independence, which he wrote, of course, at least most of it. And the first part of that, right, all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? And those words are lit up, and his statue is in the dark, and behind him is something even darker. There's like this structure, and you can't quite tell what it is when you first come in. It's like these sort of dark looks like boxes of some sort, almost like the size of shoe boxes, and they're all painted dark, and you don't quite know what they are, and you get a little closer and you begin to see that they're shoebox-sized bricks, basically, right? They look like bricks. They're intended to be bricks, and they all have names on them. And you get a little closer and you look at what the names are, and if you don't figure it out within a few seconds, the docents will be happy to tell you what the names and the bricks represent if you haven't figured it out already, right? And all of those bricks, hundreds of them, represent the human beings owned by the man who wrote those words, that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. So you see, truth and justice doesn't come from the great man, because that man, whom we consider quite great in our American history, owned hundreds of other human beings, violated his own principles. The only reason we're here today is because black folks believed his words more than he believed his words. Know that. And then you move on, and you see some other things. There's an auction block from which human beings were sold by great men, quote unquote. An auction block on which we're told Andrew Jackson once stood to give a speech. Nat Turner's Bible is there. There's an axe handle that used to belong to Lester Maddox, segregationist governor of Georgia, who used to, before he was governor, run folks out of his restaurant with an axe handle who were black. And you're reminded as you walk through this place, Emmett Till's casket is there. You're reminded of something very important for us right now, and never forget it. And what is that lesson? That lesson is that folks of color have been overcoming bigger and badder than Donald John Trump for a long time. And if you think for even 1 minute that this thing is done, if you think for even 1 minute that folks of color are going to fold when they didn't fold for Bull Connor, when they didn't fold for Jim Clark on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, when they didn't fold when Martin and Malcolm and Medgar were murdered, when they didn't fold when Fannie Lou Hamer was beaten in the jail in Ruleville, I promise you, you have not studied this country's history, and you do not know black and brown people. So this thing right here, this thing right here is just beginning. This is not the end of anything, it's the start. So welcome to the resistance, and here we go. So what does this mean in real terms? See, here's the thing. This is what concerns me. Having said everything that I just said, I also importantly want to point out that this is not about Donald Trump. It's just a recent manifestation of some really old. You know, if you saw the SNL skit like the week after the election, right? Chappelle and Chris Rock on the show, right? These white folks up in their crib in Brooklyn, we're all freaking out. They're like, how could this happen? My God, how are people this racist? And see, the two black folks were like, really? Y'all are shocked by this? Like, this was like, we just call this Monday, you know, this is. People of color weren't really shocked. That's not to say that people of color aren't upset now. There's a difference between being surprised that it happened and shocked. Maybe folks didn't think it was going to happen, but that doesn't mean that you were like, oh my God, how is this possible, right? You know, like, things happen, right? And so we got to understand that even though some of this stuff is new in the sense of maybe the level of extremity or the level of danger that we're looking at right now because of some historic circumstances, some of this stuff is really old. Like the struggle right now isn't really that different than the struggle 6 months ago. It's not really that different than the struggle a year ago or 3 years ago or 5 years ago. The struggle for police accountability, it's not any different. It may be harder, right, with an administration that is not going to investigate police unaccountability the same way. That's not going to attempt to hold police accountable for the things that they do nearly as much even as the last one. The last one didn't do enough either. But these folks probably not going to do it. So that's a problem, but the struggle is the same. You understand? Even if the ability to find allies in high places is less, that doesn't change the struggle itself. We still make the same arguments. We still mobilize in the same way. And so if unarmed black folks are 3 times more likely than unarmed white folks to be shot, and that is a fact nationwide, then the struggle is the struggle, whether Donald Trump is president or not, right? If racial profiling is such that people of color are 3 to 4 times more likely to be stopped and searched for drugs, even though white folks are twice as likely to have drugs on us on the occasion when we're searched, and that's a fact, the struggle is the same, whether Donald Trump is the president or not. So some of this isn't really new, and I want us to understand that because I don't want us to get knocked off stride by the idea that the struggles are now the result of this administration. This stuff has been going on for a very long time. Most importantly, and here's the really key thing, right? The very election of this man, based on the rhetoric and the narrative that he spun, is America 101. Because if I had to explain to you in one phrase the history of this country, with regard to race and with regard to class, this would be the phrase. The whole history of America is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their problems are caused by brown and black people. That is the whole history of America. All the rest, as they say, is commentary, right? It's all footnote from there. Right? The whole history of America is rich white men, or at least men who say they're rich. Now, we don't really know, do we? We don't really know. He inherited, not even inherited, took over a $237 million real estate empire from his daddy, but likes you to believe he is a self-made man. All right. Give me $237 million worth of assets, and I will probably become rich too. Doesn't take a lot of skill, would take a hell of a lot of skill to lose all that dough. So I'm not sure we need to applaud the man for that, but whatever. He says he's rich, and for the sake of my argument, I'm just going to give it to him because it helps my history lesson. So we'll stick with it. Rich white men telling not rich white people that their problems are brown people. That goes back 400 years. All right? Go back to the 1600s. What do we see in the colonies of what would become the United States? We see rich white people who are very, not even called, first of all, they're not called white yet, because we hadn't created that yet, right? We hadn't thought of that. See, that was some other stuff. We came up with that. We hadn't thought of that yet. There were some rich European people who owned all the land, and among them were what? African enslaved folks and European peasants, many of them indentured servants, right? Just one level above enslavement themselves. And they outnumbered the rich dramatically. In some places 5 to 1, 10 to 1, other places 2 to 1, but always outnumbered the rich. The rich were always a very small percentage. Just like right now, the top 1/10 of 1% of Americans owns the same amount of stuff as the bottom 90%. Wealth inequality is not really new. It's been the legacy of America. It might be more extreme right now than it's been in the contemporary period, but at the outset of the colonies, that was normative. So you had this handful of rich folks from Europe facing poor Europeans and African enslaved folks and indigenous peoples whose land they were seeking to conquer, and they began to realize something. They were like, holy hell, like this is not going to work forever. Like at some point, these folks are going to figure out that this is sort of for them. Like they're going to want to take our stuff, right? Because they're going to realize we're hurting all of them, not just enslaved African folk and indigenous folk, but even these poor European folks. So what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? Well, we got to come up with something, man. We got to have some kind of a game that we can run on them. What's the game? We got a game. We came up with a game. The game was called the white race. Right? This game was called, let's create this new fictional thing. We're going to call all these European people white people. Now, you know that's like not real, right? You think that Europeans thought of themselves as one big happy family? This is what's so funny about these white nationalists that are coming out of the woodwork in the wake of the Trump campaign. They act like whiteness has some historical pedigree. The hell, you think Europeans loved each other? Man, we spent most of our time trying to kill each other. The English hated the Irish hated the English. Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. Germans hated everybody, and the world felt the same way about them. Europeans spent most of our time trying to kill each other, or in the colonies of what became the United States, trying to figure out who the witch was. That's the history of Europeans. You're a witch. Well, you're a warlock. Well, we're gonna burn you at the stake for not worshiping our Lord the right way. That's sort of what we did, right? So the idea that we were one big team called white people is absurd. Whiteness became a concept created for one reason only, and that was to succor poor, working class, immiserated, peasant Europeans into believing that they actually were on the same team as rich people. So if you tell them, oh, well, you know, you're white now. Oh, yeah, I know. Wow. We've been kicking your ass forever, but now we're going to put you on the slave patrol. Oh, yeah. We're going to give you a horse and a badge and a gun and let you keep those black people in line for us, right? And these working class white folks on the slave patrol, the ancient precursor, if you will, to modern policing, right? Working class folks, see, because the police ain't rich and neither were the folks on the slave patrol. It was who rich people hired to protect their from everybody else. So you get these poor white folks, put them on a horse to control enslaved people to do what? To ask for their papers when you see them out. Let me see your papers. Let me see your identification. Who do you belong to? Ultimate stop and frisk, 16 and 1700 style. Racial profiling, 16 and 1700 style. Right? Prove that you belong in this community. Show me that you're legitimately in this community. Prop 187, 1600 and 1700 style. Anti-immigration, 1600 and 1700 style. And it was poor and working class white folks that got pulled into that because what? It made them feel like they're part of the team. Oh, I'm on the team now. I'm white now. For real, because these other white folks, they don't love you. They would starve you. They did back in the old country, but now they gave you a taste of power. They gave you what W.E.B. Du Bois called what? The psychological wage of whiteness. Right? And that won't pay your bills, but it'll make you feel better. It puffs you up, right? It's like, I may not have much, but at least I'm not black. I may not have much, but at least I'm not indigenous. I may not have much, but at least I'm not Mexican when we jack half of their country in a war of aggression that we started. I know that's not... I know that's not what they taught you in 8th grade, but that's how that actually went down. You may not have much, but at least you're not Chinese brought to work on the railroads and build them from dusk to dawn and dawn to dusk to build the transcontinental economy of this country. So you may not have much, but at least you're better than them, see? And so you create that mentality. You divide and conquer working class coalitions. You give European people just a little bit of taste of power and say, those are your enemy. And then that works for generations. And then we come up to the Civil War era, right? And it's still working, right? My folks from the South, I'm from the South, lived in the South all my life. And the only difference between those of us from the South and the rest of y'all is we know that our stinks, see?
Whyte challenges what is sometimes called the great man theory. They believe that one powerful leader can solve a nation's biggest problem, guys. And honestly, when you think about history, there is a lot to consider here, guys. America is major social changes did not happen simply because one person woke up and decided to change the country, guys. That is what you should know. And changing this country by one day is very difficult. They happened because ordinary people organized. They protested. They resisted, guys. They marched, voted, sacrificed, and demanded for change, guys. And I like the way Whyte is presenting his ideas. And Whyte points to the National Museum of African American History and Culture as an example of this broader history. So guys, the story of racial progress in America is not simply the story of presidents or famous politicians. It is also the story of ordinary people who refuse to accept injustice. And this brings us to one of the wisest, most important arguments in all of these videos. And this is the argument that made me feel like I don't really admire the way Wise usually talks. You know, Wise, he says that throughout America history, racial division has often been used to prevent working people from recognizing their common interest, guys. Can you imagine about that? And also, I want you to think about that, guys. If poor and working class people are struggling economically, guys, so one possible response is to ask why wages are low, why wealth is concentrated, or why opportunities are unequal. So, guys, but another strategy is to confuse people that their problems are being caused by another racial or ethnic group. And when people are fighting each other, they are less likely to question the powerful structure above them because they may be concentrating a lot in fighting against each other instead of asking very important questions from the authorities. So, Wise also he discusses the idea of whiteness, guys. So, he says that racial categories were historically constructed and used to create divisions among working people, guys. And this, if you remember during the colonization, this was the exact method that was used by these colonizers back in Africa to colonize the African people. And they used the chief method where the chiefs they were given presents. And at the end of the day, those people got colonized through their chiefs who agreed. So, guys, some European immigrants who were struggling economically could still be offered a sense of racial status above black people and other minorities. So, this idea connects with the W.E.B. Du Bois' famous discussions of the psychological wedge associated with the whiteness. In simple terms, even when someone was economically disadvantaged, being placed higher in the racial hierarchy could give them a sense of status, guys. And that could make it harder for poor and working class people from different racial backgrounds to unite. Now, guys, whether you agree with every part of Wise's argument or not, I think there's a bigger question here that deserves attention. What happens when people are encouraged to blame each other instead of examining the system that affects everyone? Because racism doesn't exist separately from economics, politics, history, and power. And the division we see today did not appear overnight, guys. They have deep historical roots. That is why Wise's message ultimately goes beyond Donald Trump or any other individual politician. So, guys, his argument is that changing the person in the White House does not automatically change the structure of society. Real change requires ordinary people to remain involved. It requires people to organize, speak out, challenge injustice, and refuse to allow divisions to destroy the ability to work together. And perhaps that is the most important lesson, guys. Political leaders can influence a country, but ordinary people have always played a powerful role in determining whether that country ultimately goes. So I want to leave you with these questions, guys. Are people too focused on finding one person to save America, when real change has always depended on millions of ordinary people standing together, guys? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you enjoyed these discussions, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video to anyone you feel that may like it. May it be a friend, a family member, a colleague. You can share it. And if you're new here, don't forget to click the subscription button, guys. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one.